Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today, we're going to talk about something that I wrestle with quite a bit. And recently, I heard a podcast that I really have enjoyed listening to in the last couple weeks, and it came upon the same topic. And so I'm talking about the push-pull that happens with us women in terms of living a life that brings us joy versus trying to meet the expectations of your family, society, your job, your children, whomever. And this idea is something that I have really been focused on for probably 20 years because it's something that I feel like haunts me from time to time. And I've started listening to, now I'm blanking on her name, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And she does a podcast called Wiser Than Me. And on a weekly podcast, she interviews older women and asks them about their life and different things about their career or their family life or whatever they are known for. And she starts to unpack some of those things. She always asks at the end some of the same questions, which is there something you would tell yourself yourself at 21? And she will also ask a question, which is, what would you like me to know about aging? And then the second question, I've got these out of order. She'll say, is there something you should have said yes to? And I find it really interesting how people respond to those questions. And she's on her second season of the podcast. And she did a summary as she started her first podcast of the second season. And she said that as she looked at the trends of all the people she interviewed, and she, I think by design, only interviews women or older women. And one of the things that she identified as a trend that everybody said that she interviewed in season one was one of their regrets about almost being too controlled by other people's expectations and how in their older age they realized that it really was something that they should have done more of. They should have lived the life that they wanted to without really filtering through their actions what other people expected from them. And as I said to Alyssa when we were talking about topics and what do we want to talk about, I said, this is something that when she brought that up, I thought, oh, I can totally see that. And that's one of my fears that even though I've been very much aware of this as something that I am focused on, that I will still have a regret in my 70s and 80s that I still in my 50s and 60s still didn't do as much of what I wanted, my heart really desired, versus trying to keep everybody's expectations in balance. So I'm going to bring Alyssa into this conversation and have Alyssa talk a little bit about her impression of this topic and how it resonates with her.
Yeah, I think that this is such an interesting thing because I was reflecting as we were talking about how I recently saw a post about somebody who said the laundry can wait, essentially was the title of the post. And it was just talking about that there's things, I think it's not directly saying expectations, but I think that is something that we set expectations or we think that the expectations are a certain way. And for me, that trans transpires as having a clean, tidy home. That's an expectation that I put on myself that if someone were to come over, I need to have the house in a certain way. And that's something that really my husband and I were just having conversation about this. So I'm all over the place, but I'll tie it all back together by the time I'm done. But he was saying, I really like hosting and having people over, but it's not fun. All the work that goes into it and all the stress that you have of trying to get the house perfect and how you want it. It's just not fun anymore. And I was like, man, that's such an unfortunate thing because we really do love having people over. But to me, the expectation that was handed down from past generations down to me was the house is a reflection of the woman, that my house has to be a certain way in order for people to appreciate. And if it was pure chaos, which sometimes it is, I don't ever want to show that to people. And so I think that expectation, again, I think that's the one that resonates the most with me. But I also hope that there's some way that I can counter that, or some way that I can let it go little by little and say it's okay. I've heard people say 80% clean is better than 100%. Stop striving to do all the things at the sake of your family and enjoying the time with them and enjoying, all those precious moments. And so I think that this can definitely resonate for anybody, regardless of where you're at in life, because I think for me, that's a big one. That's a big thing that I wrestle with probably daily. Like I almost, so to round this out, I was just listening to an intentional parenting summit the other day, and they were talking about a bunch of different things, but they were saying about it's okay if you let go of that particular expectation and just enjoy life, to be more intentional and to be more present and to just not feel this ongoing need to have to do everything or do those things that really tear you down or really stress you out. And so I think that this ties into a lot of topics that we talked about lately or over the last couple of months, but I think that it's a great one to reflect on and be able to say, you know what, I need to be more intentional, or I need to let go of these expectations. But I think the next step is you can acknowledge it, but then how do you do that? Because for me, it's in my core, this expectation that I need to have a tidy home. And as much as I try to counter, it's really hard. So I don't know, Joji, if that speaks to what you're talking about. You said 20 years, as I appreciated, because I think it might take me at least 20 years for me to try to counter this.
Yeah, I think that's the whole rub with this discussion is that from a very young age, we get messages that are stated and unstated about what it means to fulfill our parents' expectations or be successful or live a good life or all these different cliches that we're trying to fulfill. And so I think that when you say that this is to the core of you, I think that really gets to the heart of the matter, which is that it's not a simple thing to shed that skin, right? These are things that are ingrained in us. And over the years, it's become synonymous with being a good person, being a good wife, being a good mother, having a clean home, being a good employee, being a good leader. And I think that's where it gets really complicated because as you start to, and as women, we're also, in addition to what I just said, I think women, we're also taught that if we focus on us, and what makes us happy, then that is selfish. And that means that we're taking happiness possibly away from, our spouse or our children or our parents who we should care for or love or be loyal to. And so I think and this is not a new topic per se. I think we run around this topic quite a bit because I think as women, we're always push pulling against what makes us happy, what makes other people happy, and as Alyssa knows about me, I do like to have the comfort of other people having research done on this or this topic and saying, yeah, this is really an issue that a lot of people face. And not only did Julia Louis Dreyfus find this out after talking to the season of 10, 12 women that she spoke to, but then I also found an article on the Institute on Aging, and they had an article called Aging and Satisfaction Life Lessons from the Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And what this article really talks about is using an Australian palliative nurse thoughts after working with people who are dying and hearing 5 top messages. And the first one is what we're talking about. And the book, let me just give you the citation for this author. So it's Bonnie Ware, Ware, and she has written a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the number one regret is I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. And so what she goes to talk about is that they've regretted making choices about how they live just to please other people. And this definitely talks about the example that Alyssa brought into play, which is your idea of what being a good housekeeper, mother, wife looks like. And so living authentically, and we've talked about this before, living the life that's true to who you are requires us to say no to some people and say yes to us, which creates a conflict for us as individuals, but mostly as women. I definitely feel like we're definitely taught to go with the flow, don't rock the boat, don't stand out. Those are all things that I personally have been told, and I know that other women have as well. And but the one thing that she also talks about is to remind us that it's never too late to being true to ourselves and choosing us over others. And that the sooner you start, the less regret you will have at the end of your life. And so she challenges us also to think about what can we do today to honor our authentic self. And so I think it gives us something to chew on in terms of how do we start working on that? And until you start thinking about it, I really don't feel like it is going to be anything that cuts through to the surface that you're thinking about on a regular basis. I almost feel like it's got to be a mantra. It's got to be something that we continually ask ourselves every single day so that it breaks through some of the pressures that have been ingrained in us since birth, really, and since we started absorbing other people's expectations of us. Alyssa, what do you think of Bonnie Ware's comments about how she understood being true to yourself and being authentic?
Yeah, I what resonated with me was what you were saying about the mantra or the continuously telling ourselves that even in light of these kind of core values or things that have been ingrained in us, that if we have to keep counteracting that, we have to keep turning around and saying, okay. And I think for me, that's one of the things that happens a lot. But I was going to actually comment on the fact that I think sometimes our experiences actually reinforce those things. So, the example again, if I'm staying in line with my idea of having a tidy home, there have been times where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to let everything go. I'm not going to kill myself tonight. It's been a long week. Friday nights are really like the night where I just don't want to clean. And so I've had those times where I've just been like, you know what? I'm going to let it go. I'm just going to enjoy. And then it inevitably, somebody calls me Saturday morning and is like, hey, do you want to get together? We could hang out. And somehow, some way, it ends up at my house. And all of a sudden, now I'm in this whirlwind of, oh, if I had cleaned yesterday, it would be less. It's almost as if that self fulfilling prophecy in some ways of, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna let this go. I'm not going to do what I've always done. And then something happens where I'm like, oh, see, like I didn't do it and now I'm in this predicament. So I don't think that happens all the time. I probably me letting go of things happens like once every 6 months. So maybe if I let go more often and that didn't happen, I would be able to say, oh, that was just a fluke situation. But I think that sometimes we also have these certain expectations. And then when we try to move away from them or say, no, this is okay, this is not, we don't have to do this. We don't have to do it this way. We can do it a different way. And going outside the box, I think sometimes that can be scary. And then if we have a negative experience, all of a sudden we're like running back into what we know because all of a sudden that doesn't feel good. That was too unsafe. And I'm just going to go back to what I know, even if in our minds, like, this is not healthy. This is not helping us. It's only adding more stress to our plate. But a lot of times we just resort back because we don't know what else to do.
Yeah. And I think the one thing I would say to you, Alyssa, is that it's so interesting because there are some things that could have happened to not take you back to that panic state. Like you could have easily had said in your head, if I'm not, since I didn't, instead of going down that whirlwind and negative talk about, oh gosh, I didn't do this. And here again is the idea for all of us to have to be perfect. What would have been the hard thing to make sure that it didn't end up in your house, right? And that wouldn't spike that feeling of, oh gosh, if I had done it as I was supposed to, this is what happens when I let things go. Just to make sure that the conversation would not have let yourself it come to your house or to put it out there that I didn't clean the house. And so we can come, but it's got to be a non-judgment zone. Like you have to not allow to not spur this like angst of being able to run around like a Energizer bunny and clean the whole house out. Is you have to feel like, okay, so what are some of the other acceptable things that you could do without beating yourself up? Because I think it's the beating yourself up that reinforces the rigidity of having to have your house really clean. And that's what we remember, right? Because that's the residue that we take with us is, oh, I wasn't prepared. If I had done what I should have done, I could have had them over with no problem. But that also assumes the fact that you had to be the host, or you could have met in a neutral spot, or to come clean if that's the way you see it with the person you are inviting over to say something interfered with me being able to clean and not having to say I gave myself a break or whatever. But just to say we can come here. The house is not in a condition that I'm really comfortable with. But if that's our only option, I don't want to sacrifice time with you because my house is not clean. How do those things, how do you hear those things coming across?
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you. I think that and this goes back to expectations that others that that I'm trying to think of how you worded it, but it goes back to the expectations that we set for ourselves or that others have set for us that I think sometimes we can't meet or that we just set the bar too high. So what you're saying, like I have done that where I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. House is not the way I want it." But the expectation again is that the house is a reflection of me. And so even when I say those words to a person, I still do the whirlwind of cleaning up as much as I can before they walk through the door. The other thing that happens for me, and again, I know we're using like a house, so hopefully for our listeners, you can translate this to whatever the expectation you're struggling with. But the other thing that happens for me is that compliment me. I think probably 99% of the time people are like, "Oh my gosh, your house is amazing. It looks great." Like, I don't know how you do it with 4 kids. And yet I never feel like it's not quite good enough. And I've not ever had a person be like, "Oh, you should have cleaned up around here." I don't know what cruel person would say that anyway, and I probably just don't have friends like that. All of my friends are also have most of them have kids themselves or understand, "Hey, you have 4 kids." So their expectations for me, their bar of where I'm supposed to be is much lower than the bar that I hold for myself. And that I think is where the struggle lies because I'm more likely to be harder on myself than the people around me. My husband included. He's, "Hey, the house looks great." And I'm like, "No." Like, I'm pretty sure he would say we could host people today and we have not done any cleaning. And he'd be like, "Yeah, it's fine. Like this is like, why do you have such a high expectation of what it needs to be?" But again, I think to me, it's like this if people and I've had this question posed to me before, so won't go too psychoanalytic here. But like people have asked me like, what would it mean if your house was messy? I'm like, that would mean I don't have control. I am out of control. Things are out of control. And so that's the one thing I feel like I can control. And so that's why the expectation is so high. So again, I know we're talking about house cleaning, but I think that this translates hopefully for other people, the expectations that you set for yourself, whether that's to be a certain look, how you dress, how you present yourself, whether that be the job that you're in because your parents said you had to be successful or somebody said you wouldn't be successful. So you had to prove them wrong. I think that there's a lot of different ways that this can look. And I think that I'll throw it back to you, Joji, as far as we've focused on my expectations or the ones that I feel have been set for me, but I think that it can look a lot of different ways depending on what your particular expectations are.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody today, and one of the things that we talked about a little bit was how, as a young mom, she has a master's degree, and she had a hard time getting pregnant, and she got pregnant, and now she's trying to find the balance between doing something that fulfills her in addition to being a mom. And I think the people around her are making her feel like you had such a hard time getting pregnant. Why don't you why it's almost like she's not grateful for having a baby because she's also thinking about what could she do around being a full-time mom. Is there something because her child is going to start school or started preschool And so now she has more time on her hands and she wants to do something different. But once again, even as a young mom, there's this idea of why isn't that enough for you? Yes, you worked hard to get a master's degree, but that shouldn't compete with your family. Right. And she was feeling like in certain ways, she is a person of faith. And she said, I there's a part of me that also feels like if I don't live up to my full potential of the gifts that God gave me, then am I not doing justice to what the plan is for me? And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it because in Lean Six Sigma, which is productivity, like a ongoing process improvement model, the one of the biggest wastes that we talk about is human potential. And she said the plan that God has for me, and I thought, oh, that's like the lean waste of human potential. And like, how do we balance that out? Of can you be more than one? Can you have more than one identity? And why is it that even in 2024? That people around us are trying to keep us, um, put us into a box of what is right for us. And why is it that wanting to work outside the home or feed their soul of doing something that has makes them feel good about themselves is in direct conflict with being a wife and mom? I guess I'm still struggling with that and how to talk to our young listeners who are going to be in that struggle to say it's not fair for somebody to put you in that. It's another example, and I think one that a lot of women face is their mothering questioned because they want more than taking care of their children or taking care of their husband or keeping their house or making sure dinner's on the table every night or whatever that role looks like for them. I just felt so I don't know, struck by this gal saying it's not even about it's really about what is God's plan for her and is she who do you let down? And in her life where faith is an important part of her life, she thinks in some way that letting God down is probably the worst thing she can do. And so Lissa, you must have some ideas about that. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think about what she said to me?
And I think that goes back to and I'm hesitant to say like traditional views because I don't really know what traditional is nowadays, but I think that some of this speaks to the expectations that were put on society, put on women in society way back when. The idea that you're supposed to keep a home and raise the children and all of that, and then it speaks to some of that. And I don't know if that's the sense that you're getting or what you're running into. But I think that those expectations really have to shift because of the fact that nowadays, even making pretty good money, my husband and I work or we live paycheck to paycheck. And that's a whole nother discussion about budgeting and whatnot. I think that there are ways to get off of that. But I think that I heard the other day like 78 or 80% of families in the United States live paycheck to paycheck. There's a pretty large, substantial amount of people who do that. And I think that if you work outside the home or if you're not, if just taking care of and I don't say just in a negative way, but if your job is to take care of your kids, but you're trying to do other things, I think a lot of times people will say, why are you trying to do those things? Why would you add to that? I think that it can come in so many different forms. But I do agree that I think at the end of the day, you have to look at what's going to make you happy outside of whatever anybody says. I think that I've learned that one thing I've learned with having 4 kids is I'm going to parent and I'm going to do it the way that works best for me and my family. And the expectations of how I'm supposed to do it, I'm not doing that way. I think that it's one of those things that I can say definitively parenting is an area that I feel more confident in now than I did 10 years ago. I do work outside the home and my career is something that defines who I am, but I'm also a mother and sister and a wife and all of those other roles and hats that we wear. But I think that a lot of times when we boil it down, it's that there's these traditional views of how it's supposed to be. And then we have to counter that and say, that might have been how it used to be, but this is how I'm doing it because this is what's best for me and my family. And tough. That's like how it comes. And when I think about it, because I think that any other way you're doing yourself a disservice and you're not being genuine to who you want to be.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking about the question that Julia Louis Dreyfus asks each of her interviewees is there what would you go back and say yes to? And they all have only one person in season one didn't have anything because she had made a commitment. And interestingly enough, it ties to a little bit of what you're saying. So this actually might be season two, but of that podcast, and it's in a garden. And she chose not to have any children to because of very specific things that shaped her life. And then she had no regrets because she lived the life on her terms. And it was very hard given how old she is and when she was young and when she was in her 20s and 30s and what expectations were for her. But that was a very specific decision. She never regretted it. But I think that going against expectation really then allowed her to say yes to everything else that she wanted. And I think that all the other women who have been interviewed that I've listened to have didn't say yes to something out of either fear or because they were going to let somebody down or that they were not willing to take the risk because of expectations or fear or being seen as being difficult, a failure, not playing the game, something like that. And so I just find it so interesting that even the regrets that women would go back and change also tie back to what they could have done differently and who they could have become and the sacrifices that they made to keep that perception going in their lives. And it is really a challenge and it is definitely hard to play by different rules and sometimes really feel like the outsider because you're not playing by the rules and you don't want to go with the flow with the way other people are deeming what's important. It's something we've talked about before. It's something we'll talk about, I'm sure, again, because this is one of the greatest conflicts that women have. And I think it comes around every so often, probably in every decade. You look at it a little bit differently. And it's a lifetime of work as these women, even this other population of women that are talking as they're nearing their death, they're talking about how they wish they had lived a truer life and followed their own North Star, which to our listeners, I really hope it conveys the importance of asking ourselves that question about what are we doing to become more authentic and more aligned with who we want to be every day so that we can get closer to that and we don't have as much regret as clearly women do have at the end of their life. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening and joining us again today. We really appreciate the feedback that we are getting from everybody and the folks who take the time to respond to the pulse polls that we put out there to get a sense of questions that tie back to the published podcast for the week. And you don't have to listen to the podcast to respond. And we're very curious about how people react to the conversations we have. And if the poll interests you and you want to know more, then you can always go back and listen to the podcast. But we truly appreciate the insights that you all are sharing with us. As mentioned, you can reach out to us on our Facebook page. You can reach out to us on the platform you listen to or consume podcasts on. And we just want to thank you for staying with us and supporting us through this journey. For now, this is goodbye from Melissa Marie and Joji. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.